in my own experience in coping with cancer personally, stress was certainly a theme of what I needed to cope with. So this is a rather lighthearted and yet also very serious presentation. And we're taking it from The Wizard of Oz, Lions and Tigers and Bears, oh my. And I will spare you my singing as we move along into our presentation today. You may remember these characters from when you were younger. It is a screenshot, of course, from The Wizard of Oz. And we have the Tin Man and the Scarecrow, along with Dorothy, and I think that's Toto down there on the floor, walking through the forest, and they're singing to themselves. They're singing, lions and tigers and bears, oh my. Lions and tigers and bears, oh my. And they're singing it over and over again, and we can see how the tension is building for them. We can particularly see it, I think, in the Scarecrow's face. He's particularly frightened. So while we're coming at it from a rather humorous perspective, this is really about how the body and the mind work together, how the body is influenced by our thoughts, and in essence, how our thoughts can be influenced by the body. We truly are connected at all these levels. And so let's have a look and see how that works. We want to talk a bit about the stress response. All human beings are designed to experience stress and anxiety. And in fact, in some ways, stress and anxiety are reasonable, logical, and adaptive. And in fact, the stress response has helped human beings thrive on this planet. The fact that we can launch a stress response has enabled us to defend ourselves and look after ourselves and thrive. It's built into our psychology, it's built into our physiology, and in fact, it's where our physiology and psychology meld. And our stress response is complicated. In fact, I think of it as a cascade of events that happen within the body and the mind. It happens spontaneously, and it seems to happen without our control, which is part of why it feels so uncomfortable. So I'm going to tell a little story. So here we are on the African savannah, and our hero, well, let's pick the one right in the middle. He's our hero, and he's with his friends, and they're all having breakfast. In fact, someone's quite relaxed. He's sitting down and looking at the horizon. They're eating their breakfast. They're talking about the day's events. Maybe they've been reading the paper. They're having a good time. Our hero in the distance, however, notices something. Something has his attention. What is it that he sees? Who is that? He sort of recognizes it, but he's not sure. Something about the contour, something about the profile. He's saying to himself, what is that? And as soon as he thinks that, all sorts of physiological changes are beginning to happen in his body. He's perceiving the possibility of a threat, and that's registering in his brain. So suddenly there is a rapid mobilization of his energy. He's dropping glucose into his system, glucose, which is energy for short term, fat, which is energy for long term. His heart rate increases. We all know that feeling. And his blood pressure increases as well. His respiration goes up. And all of this is adaptive. It's to fuel the muscles that he's going to need in response to the threat that he's perceiving. His vision is enhanced, and his other senses are enhanced. So he can hear better, and he can see better. And because he's an antelope, he can probably smell better. That's not something that generally works in human beings. And his memory is enhanced. He's tuning in. And in fact, he's kind of going through a file in his brain saying, have I seen this before? Is this familiar? Yeah, I think it is. I think I know what this might be. Yes, I can see it. It's a lion. And there she is, watching him and his friends have breakfast. And he knows what that means. She wants her breakfast too. Yes, it is a lion. He has identified the threat. So what's happening in his body now? all of the long-term projects that his body continually carries on throughout the day, they all shut down because he has to divert energy into running or fighting. His digestion stops. Now, as human beings, we can relate to that sense of when we're stressed, that we can have digestion problems. Growth and reproduction stop. It's not something maybe that you notice particularly on a day-to-day level, but certainly in small children that have had trauma and stress, their growth can be altered. And we also know that women don't reproduce well or easily when they are living under chronic stress. Tissue repair decreases because that requires blood and the immune system to be active. And right now, that energy is being diverted. The immunity shifts, it decreases. It's related to tissue repair. It's because that's a long-term health project. Pain sensitivity decreases. That's really important. We've all heard the stories of soldiers who are hurt in battle, who don't even notice that they've been hurt. Or football players who break a bone and continue to play until afterwards when they notice how much pain they're in. We all begin to focus on the short-term project of survival. That's the most important thing. So what does our friend do? He runs. And his other friends, they run too. They don't have to be told why. They are connected as a community. And when one bolts and runs, everybody runs because they're not going to take the time to say, hey, Bob, what's up? What are you running about? Where's Bob going? What's that about? They don't do that. They all take off at the same time and run for their lives. You'll notice that that ability to pick up tension is very present in human beings. Walk through any medical clinic and you'll notice that tension can be contagious. Well, you know what she's doing. She's going to run too, because now is her time to get breakfast. So she is also going through all of the same changes that the antelope is going through. Long-term projects shut down, short-term project of survival is the first thing that's gathering her attention, and she's moving as quickly as she can. He's running, she's running, and it really is a battle for life. And in this case, our friend makes it. And the interesting thing about what he's going to do now is antelopes, or lions rather, will run for about 30, 40 seconds, and then they'll stop because the cost of catching the antelope isn't worth it. A healthy antelope can get out of the reaches of a lion if it keeps running for about 30 to 40 seconds. The lioness will not put out more energy because it's not worth the balance. She's not going to get enough calories to replace the ones that she's using. Now, this is also an interesting point. Our friend the antelope and all his other friends put their heads back down and begin to eat their breakfast again. What they don't do is talk to each other. They don't say, wow, can you believe it? Did you see what she did? I know, I think she was the one here last week. Did she get Bob? Yeah, I think she did get Bob. Oh, what audacity. We should really do something about this. It's terrible. I wonder if she'll come next week. I know, it makes me tense just thinking about it. Oh, I've got a stomachache. Antelopes don't talk about it. Antelopes have used all their chemistry in their running. They now return back to homeostasis. Long-term projects kick in, they eat their breakfast, and they stop worrying about it. And because this story has a happy ending, I imagine our lioness becoming a vegan, and she's going to be eating flowers for breakfast. I don't think it works that way, but it's a nice idea. Human beings are endowed with all of those characteristics that our friends the lion and the antelope have. And in fact, in many ways, we carry these same systems and they activate in a very similar fashion. It's just that we don't do the same things about it. Back when we were wearing fur coats in our earlier evolution, when we were stressed, we did something about it. We had a fight, we fled, we ran away, and when it was really desperate, we'd freeze. Now, as human beings, most of our stress doesn't take place when a carnivore is bearing down on us. It occurs when we're looking at our emails, It occurs when we're at work. Or, for those of us who have cancer, it occurs sitting in a chair in a doctor's office. And in fact, human beings are probably the only creatures on the planet that experience a stress response while they're strapped into a chair. And I'm thinking about driving. Lots of stress in driving, full-on stress response, and nowhere to go. So what are the effects of long-term stress? And many of us are living with long-term stress. So energy stores shift. We tire more easily, and it increases the risk of type 2 diabetes. Remember back to the antelope. That's because we're dropping all of that insulin and sugar into the system, using it for short-term energy. It increases our blood pressure, particularly if we're always on edge. Our stress tends not to peak. It tends to be kind of a steady state. And we get stomach problems like peptic ulcers, reproductive problems, and bone and tissue repair problems. Remember, those are long-term projects. And when we're stressed, we shift towards the short-term project of survival. We can have immunity problems and infections. We know that certainly people who write lots of exams, I remember clearly at school, I'd write my exams at Christmas and reliably 5 days later, I'd be sick. That's the way that our bodies will meet a challenge in the short term, but we can't maintain it for long. And that's when some of our immunity issues come up. We can have cognitive problems. Some of the brain fog issues that we talk about in coping with cancer are related to stress. When it feels like there's all this stress in our head, it's very hard to take in information, store it effectively, and then retrieve it efficiently. And stress also increases our risk of disease. An important question that many people ask is, does stress cause cancer? That's an important question, and I don't know many people coping with cancer who haven't asked why. Why has this happened, and what can I do about it? So I'm going to put on my researcher hat for a moment. Research shows that stress can be related to specific forms of cancer in animals, and those are the kinds of cancers that are virally induced, and we see them in research models. Very different in human beings. AIDS, which is a form of immunosuppression, a disease which suppresses immunity, is related to a very narrow band of cancers in actual fact. It's not the full range of cancers, it's just a few, which is kind of interesting because if immunity is being suppressed by an illness, it's not the full range of susceptibility that it causes, it's just a narrow range. Transplant patients are given lots of medication to suppress their immune systems. That's so their body can receive and accept the new organ. And we again find this odd phenomenon where they're only susceptible to a narrow range of cancers. So suppression of the immune system doesn't seem to be a full-on related to the broad range of cancers that are most common. When we look at human studies on stress, the results are quite mixed because there's so many individual factors. What one person finds stressful, another person may not find stressful. A good example of that would be something like divorce. If we look at the health profiles of people who've been recently divorced, some may experience that as tremendously stressful and grief-filled, and others may find it a freedom and a release from what's been a very difficult circumstance. So it's hard for human beings. Since we don't have lions and tigers, we have human personalities that alter our perception of what is stressful. It's very hard to pin it down as a constant. I can say, while the research is not firm on stress causing cancer, we can say, though, that cancer causes stress. And I know that anybody who is at Wellspring knows the relationship that the distress that a diagnosis and treatment can cause. Distress is not limited to the patient. It is also experienced by caregivers. And I do hope that there are some caregivers listening in today because you're as in need of care as anybody else. life stressors can influence the distress experienced. So what I mean by that is, it's not as if everything else backs down when there's a diagnosis of cancer. It's not as if the world says, oh, you're diagnosed, you cope with that while we take care of everything else that's on your mind, like the finances, our work, family issues. In fact, what we do find is other problems amp up as we become more involved in coping with cancer. We have less energy to manage other issues. Personal history can be a factor in how stress is related to cancer. If we have a family history of cancer, that can be, the distress from our history can be provoked by our own diagnosis. Personal resources influence stress as well. If we have lots of support around us, we're more likely to cope better than if we're feeling isolated and alone. And that's one of the places where Wellspring can make a big difference. We're a community and we're here to support you. And distress can fluctuate. It can go up and down like a roller coaster. I remember very clearly in my own experience having moments when I felt, yeah, I can do this. I'm on top of it. I cope. I know how to do this. And other days that felt low and awful and stuck and fearful and anxiety ridden. And then I noticed it would change again. And so part of the distress was this sense of not being able to rely on how I felt. And that almost made me feel like I was losing my mind as well as all the other things that were going on in my life. Coping strategies can decrease stress. We know this from research. Most of my research has been done on the Healing Journey program, one of the many programs that's offered at Wellspring. And we found in our research that when people learn how to cope with stress, they learn strategies for decreasing the impact of stress on their bodies and minds. They were able to cope better. And that was actually measurable. So here's a funny picture of the brain. And really the message here is that our brain comes in sort of three general forms. The green is really basic. That's the medulla. It does our breathing, our heart rate, our temperature, our balance. It kind of keeps us on our feet. The red part of the brain is old. It's an old part of the brain in terms of our evolution. And we think of it as the reptilian part of the brain. This is why crocodiles are fierce. I once watched a group of crocodiles in, or maybe they were alligators, not sure, in Costa Rica, and they were all sitting around in the river. And when any of them moved, they were very careful around each other, not to step on each other's toes or irritate each other. That's because alligators kind of take things personally, and they can be ferocious if they feel disturbed or challenged. So that red part of our brain is pretty primitive. And that's actually where we hold our feeding part of the brain that has appetite, the part of us that does the fighting, fleeing, or freezing, and is the part of us that makes babies. It's very primitive. The blue part of our brain, or the purple part of our brain, is the more advanced part. This is the part of the brain that does the thinking. It can plan for the future. It can predict what's going to happen, the consequences of various behaviors. It's where our compassion, our personality sits, right here in the frontal lobes. This is a more advanced part of the brain. This is a very stripped down picture of how stress moves through the body. So the brain, just like our antelope, perceives the stress, the threat. It triggers the hypothalamus, which talks to the pituitary gland, which releases a chemical called ACTH, which goes down to the adrenal glands, and poof, we have a response. We have cortisol, which you may have heard about before. Cortisol is a stress hormone. Epinephrine and norepinephrine, which are both forms of energizing chemicals that create that ability to run and fight. They also shut down those long-term projects, particularly cortisol. There we are. That's how it all works. And the amygdala is also part of the perceiving. The amygdala is actually where those 4 F's live: the fighting, the fleeing, the feeding, and the making babies part. It's actually a little more complicated than that. This is a more complicated version of what we're talking about, but I think you get the drift. So, anxiety and worry. Anxiety and worry, in part, are created by what we think. If we are thinking about the future, about things that are uncertain, we may be creating a situation where we are perceiving a threat that may not in fact exist, or a threat that may not in fact happen. In fact, we rehearse or imagine ourselves in anxious situations as a way to feel more prepared. The difficulty is sometimes that rehearsing is always rehearsing the bad part of the story or the challenging part of the story, rather than seeing things turn out well. This process of rehearsing or imaging things that make us anxious can initiate a problem-solving process in the short run, and in fact can get us through lots of stressful moments, like what do I do if the Zoom doesn't work? Well, that's an anxious thought. No, there's Amir. He's going to come in. He's going to help me. But in the long run, it can be competitive or repetitive, distressful, and habitual. That's when we get stuck in rotating thoughts that are distressing. And they usually sound something like this. What if? What if the chemo doesn't work? What if the next scan isn't good? What if? What if? What if? And we send ourselves spinning down a dark hole of anxiety. The difficulty is that the body is listening. It doesn't know the difference between a thought that creates the trigger and the actual lion that creates the trigger. Our antelope friend doesn't go around imagining lions. He just knows what to do when he comes across one. Human beings, however, endowed with these beautiful frontal lobes that involve imaging and imagining and imagining the future, this is where it happens. We create a situation in our minds, and the body is going to give us the chemical profile to respond to that thought. It's just a result of our ability to plan and imagine consequences. But you know, as I talk about it, I'm again struck by how exhausting that is. If we're in a situation of ongoing stress and trauma, we develop a position of hypervigilance. Hypervigilance is where the body is so on alert and the brain is so alert for any signals of distress or threat that we overreact to everything, like a loud noise making us jump. If we're stressed, we're more likely to do that. And it's not that the noise is creating the stress, it's that our bodies are tuned up to be stressed. I think of it as having a house alarm that's too finely set, so that when the wind blows and the shutters move or the curtains blow, the house alarm goes off. It's not that you're being broken into. It's not that there is a fire. It's just that something undangerous, something simple, has triggered the full-on alarm system. The body is in a state of alert. Sometimes there's anticipatory anxiety, certainly before we're used to something. I very much remember how I felt before my first chemotherapy. A lot of anxiety because I didn't really know what to expect. And sometimes it works the other way. We relive the event over and over, where people get stuck in memory. And sometimes that can begin to look like post-traumatic stress. We also have triggers that excite us and cause that house alarm to go off. Cancer patients have a lot of triggers, not just the things we see, but even the things that we smell. I can walk through the chemo unit still and have that sense of, ooh, when I smell alcohol or the smell of hospital gowns or sheets. So part of our survival as human beings has been our ability to imagine things happening. So imagine our primordial selves walking through the forest and our mothers or fathers saying to us, be careful, look out for the snakes, look out for the bears and the tigers. I want you to be careful out there. And so that the ones of us that survived in those early days when we were wearing fur coats, the ones of us that survived are the ones that were able to tune in to anxiety and triggers around us and sometimes overreact. A breaking of a twig isn't dangerous, but it could have been a bear. And the very fact that we ran away, we may never know if that breaking branch was a threat or not. But we overreacted and we were safe. And as we grow up, we tend to take these things with us. So back to our friends walking through the forest. Notice that one of the things that they're doing is they're scaring themselves with their thoughts. They're going around and around, lions and tigers and bears, lions and tigers and bears. And many of us do that, particularly when we're coping with cancer. We go round and round. I'm going to show you some pictures, and I'm saying this is a possible trigger for you because I know that these are the sorts of things that make us feel distressed. So the first one's going to be the picture of a clinic. Sitting in a clinic is very much like sitting with fellow antelopes. One of us is stressed and we all begin to pick it up. That's because we're still mammals like antelopes. We may have our frontal lobes, but we still have that more basic brain that picks up stress from other people. I don't know anybody who feels happy waiting in an oncology clinic. Seeing a white coat. In fact, this phenomenon is so powerful, it has a name, the white coat phenomenon. And we know that when doctors take blood pressure, it's more likely to be high if they're wearing a white coat than if they're wearing street clothes, because we react to that trigger. Work. Work can be a big trigger too. Just thinking about work can start the heart beating and raise the blood pressure. Emails. Don't even want to think about what emails can make us feel like. And driving. Again, we're the only human being or the only animals on the planet that have a stress response while strapped into a chair. So what can we do? There are lots of things that we can do. But one of the most helpful ones is to begin to use our beautiful brains to imagine places that are safe. To go in our imaginations and build up a picture, a safe place inside of our heads, and allow ourselves to experience it in our memories, or with photographs, or with a movie, by allowing ourselves to enter into a memory that is safe and comfortable and beautiful. Our bodies are listening, and the stress response will decrease. So for some of us, it's a beach. For some of us, it might be the cottage. For some of us, it's imagining a beautiful sunrise in the beginning of the day, and a day that is free and easy. Imagining something that feels safe. We're all connected. This is a picture from the Healing Journey program. And the idea is that the body and the conscious mind and the deeper mind and our social experiences are all in touch with each other. Or even our spiritual world has an influence. So if I think about sitting on that dock, I feel calm, connected. I feel good. I want to thank Robert Sapolsky, who wrote a wonderful book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. I was so privileged to hear him speak once. And he studies baboons, and he's writing about baboons. I think there's actually a YouTube video of him. He studied stress responses in baboons related to their social world and their triggers. And what I really love about Sapolsky is he's actually beginning to look a bit like a baboon. But we admire him, and he's written some wonderful books. So there we are. I'm here to answer questions, and I look forward to hearing from you. So we're just preparing those questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire, for that insightful discussion on stress and for sharing your knowledge and experience with us all. We're very lucky to have you as part of our Wellspring community.
My pleasure.
Next, we'll be moving on, as Claire mentioned, to the Q&A segment of our session, and we will try to answer as many of your questions as we can. So it looks like one of our first questions we have in is, do you have any strategies to cope with the stress or anxiety that comes before having a surgery or treatment session? Is there something I can do to calm myself down?
Oh, what a super question. We can all relate to it, and I'm so glad that you've asked it. One of the things that is very hard is facing new experiences, and particularly if they're ones that are related to hospitals and cancer. I think that allowing yourself to develop a safe space in your mind, doing relaxation and guided imagery, Wellspring has a program for that, but you can also find some audio tapes online, YouTube, maybe an opportunity to find those kinds of resources. It gives you a chance to develop a relaxation response rather than a stress response. That's something that you can do ongoing, all through your experience. One of the things I've also discovered is it's great to take earbuds with you and your iPod so that you have calm music with you, or a relaxation script, so that you're filling your mind with something that feels calming and safe. The last thing that I think you want to be looking at are those televisions that they have in the units often, that have the flow of information and the weather and the crises and the political stories. I think that that's a really stressful input when you're waiting for something. Another way to look at things is to reframe our thinking about it. So when I was going into surgery, I made sure that I knew who my surgeons were, that I had met them. Not all surgeons are warm and fuzzy. Some of them are quite approachable. I got the facts that I felt that I needed to have. I got the facts that I thought I needed, and then I stopped researching. I didn't do Dr. Google because I wanted to pull back from the influx of information. I wanted to say that this relates to me. All that online stuff is more general, and I want to focus on my experience. The next thing I did was I allowed myself to appreciate how trained the medical staff are. They have spent their whole adult life learning how to do this surgery or the chemo, that this is what they do professionally. Just like I get up in the morning and have my cup of coffee and go to work, they get up in the morning, have their cup of coffee, and do surgery. It's an amazing thought. But they do it because they're good at it. They do it because they're experienced. And what feels strange and bizarre for us is actually a day at the office for them. I found that that was incredibly helpful. I think it's also possible to get psychosocial support if you're really having a hard time coping. Most hospitals that treat people coping with cancer will have a psychosocial oncology department where you can talk to a social worker or a nurse, psychologist, psychotherapist, who can help you develop a plan that works well for you, and a place to talk about what you fear so that you can let it go. Sometimes journaling is good as well, a place to write down your fearful thoughts so that you can put them in a safe place and then close the book and let it go for a little while. I hope that's helpful to you, and I wish you the very best with whatever is coming up next in your treatment plan.
Thank you so much, Claire. That was a very fantastic, detailed response. So I think we have, looks like one more question. Is all stress bad for our bodies?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. Boy, if all stress was bad for our bodies, we'd be in real trouble because life is stressful. No, stress also has a role in our lives, and that is to create resilience. And in fact, there's a lovely story about, I think it's wolf cubs, where the mother wolf allows her cubs to play on the rocks. Even though it scuffs their paws and it hurts their feet, she wants them to develop calluses so that when they grow up, they can run with the wild wolves. And that's what we want to be able to do. Stress is a natural part of life. What we need is to know how to manage it, to develop strategies that release all that chemistry that we get pent up with. Just like our antelope runs, human beings have forgotten that part of it. So exercise, even walking, spending time in nature, is a way of letting go of that tension. Talking to other people, letting it go through journaling or sharing your story in a safe place is helpful. Day-to-day stress happens as long as we know how to bring ourselves down, So no, not all stress is bad for us. A lot of stress can't be avoided. It's how we cope with it that really matters. That was a great question. Love it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. So it looks like those are the questions for today. And that concludes our Q&A session for today as well. So thank you, Claire, once again for your brilliant insight into stress and all of the coping mechanisms. And thank you once again to everyone who was able to join this Be Well talk today. And thank you for your patience as we navigated through the beginning aspect of our presentation. And we hope you'll tune in next time for another great session. Have a great day, everyone.
Have a great day. Take good care of yourselves.
Yes.